Hello, I'm Nicole Matthews. I'm the executive director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. I'm Anishinaabe from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe here in Minnesota.
My name is Audrey Inoue, and I'm with Acupuncture, and the project that I'm doing is called the Peaceful Heart Project.
My name is Mira Yusuf. I'm the executive director of Monsoon Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity, based in Des Moines, Iowa.
My name is Nina Yusuf, and I am with National Organization of API Ending Sexual Violence, or NAPISEF.
What prompted you to pursue this particular career path?
Well, I was going to school for counseling and psychology and started to look at the high rates of violence, gender-based violence in my own family. And, pretty much, everybody that I knew had either experienced violence, like domestic violence or sexual assault, or had been a secondary victim. And so really starting to look at, like, how do I impact change and change that for my kids and their kids, and really create change in our communities. And so I did an internship, and then I just started working in advocacy, and then I've been now with the coalition for over 20 years.
So what prompted me to pursue this project was, first of all, being in Chinese medicine and East Asian medicine for almost 10 years now, practicing acupuncture and herbs and energy medicine and other modalities. And then in 2020, I met Nina with NAPISEF, and she, after learning what she does, I got super curious, and she gave me trainings. She taught me about SA and the API community. I learned a lot from her, and learned a lot of what's going on in the community, what's needed. We worked on a wellness book for survivors and advocates. And in the wellness book are modalities from Asian Indigenous cultures, practices, including acupressure, energy work, qigong, even nutritious recipes. And so that was a great experience. And then Nina had told me about this grant that's coming up called the ARP grant, culturally specific, for the API community, and working with SA survivors and advocates. And so just from my work with Nina and being inspired by her and what she's doing, and seeing that there needs a lot of healing in the community, I wanted to go into this work.
I'm all about, like, whatever path that you are in, that means that you're meant to be in that place, right? Because doors are opening for me in this kind of work. But then also me being a Filipina, being an immigrant, also being living in the Philippines when I was, from like when I was born till I was about 12, 13, and then seeing that how the US militarization in the Philippines had affected women and girls and how they were seen. I think that had informed my own way of thinking, because I see myself as a feminist. I think being a Filipina made me basically I was born as a feminist in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So this path that I have now, like running on organizations or running an organization working with victims and survivors of gender-based violence, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking. So that is my practice. So my so-called, the theory, my own core values is about feminism, is about social justice, is about like decolonization. So then how I practice it then is through the work that I do on the ground, right? Even running an organization. So that for me is like when I think about career, I don't see it as a career. It's just really me being part of a movement. And it just happened that I get paid to do the work that I love. I get paid to do the work that is about community building, finding different ways of strategies and solutions that are community based. And it's all about healing, wellness, and just like being in community. So for me, it's just meant to be. And I love it.
So I am an immigrant from Indonesia, and I came to US in 1986, and I had $100 and 3 pairs of clothes. I didn't speak English. So from that I put myself through school, and when I graduated, I wanted to do something to give back. So that's I call volunteer center in San Francisco, and this organization, Women Inc. They provide, I think still now they still do that, 24-hour hotline for domestic violence survivors. So I started volunteering, answering hotline for Women Inc. And then after that, I thought, well, I'm really good at doing this, so why don't I just apply for a job? So from that, I started working in domestic violence shelter, a couple of them in San Francisco. So from women's advocate to facility manager to outreach to basically any position in the domestic violence organization. And then in 1998, in Indonesia, we have mass rape of Chinese women. And my sister texted me and said, say, Nina came back. You got to help your country, your people. So I went back. And from that point on, I think my work start shifting to focusing more on sexual violence, whether it's state violence or individual. And then moving forward, I think in year 2001, I became the executive director of San Francisco Women's Against Rape, which is one of the oldest rape crisis center in the country. So I plunged into fully into sexual assault work, and I was there for 5 years and feeling I got to go. This is just too much. There were a lot of things happen, and I received sabbatical grant from Vanguard Foundation. So I took time off, and that's kind of the best time, I think, for me, is to kind of step back and not having this emotional attachment, looking into this issue. And then from that, I did a different work. I did with youth, and then I did 0 to 5, early Head Start. And then somehow I was invited for a meeting and start talking about we need to create an organization to focus on sexual violence for API. And at that time, and until now, there was no service provider that's specific for SA for API. So just example, if it's for domestic violence, there is Asian Women Shelter, right? So it's Asian Women Shelter. They provide mostly domestic violence. Yes, they've also provided services for sexual assault survivor, but not just focus on sexual violence. So we thought that it is important to create an organization, so then we can take a look like what's going on in our community. So that's how it's NLPSF started. We started with 5 co-founders, and that's 2010, I think, 2011. And by 2013, we received grant from Office of Violence Against Women, I think 2012. So again, it's not a career path. I think I'm not really looking for it, but it just like came to me.
What makes this particular work important?
You know, when I was working in advocacy, I worked in a mainstream program serving all victims in a county program. And once I transitioned and started working for the tribal coalition, and being able to work in my own community and work, with other Indigenous people really changed things for me, because it's different when you're working in your own community. It feels less like work and more like it's my mission, my life purpose. So very much connected to my purpose in life.
I think it's important because there's a lot of healing that's needed in this community amongst the SA survivors and advocates. The toll that it can take on the body, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, can be really devastating. And so with healing, especially using, ancient Indigenous practices, can be super beneficial for people and their wellness. And so, and the same with the advocates doing all the work in the community. They're doing some amazing work and they're working so hard. It's common to see a lot of burnout. And so they also need a lot of support and a lot of healing in their own wellness and health as well.
I think, okay, so being in Iowa, which is, let's say 90% white, and only like maybe, let's say 7% like non-white or people of color or communities of color, I think that is very significant, because the fact that I'm the founder of Monsoon, I started the organization 20 years ago. I came from the San Francisco Bay Area, came to Iowa because my mother lives here. And then I started the organization. I think having someone who looks like me, being in this state where, someone who looks like me might not run a nonprofit, I think that is very significant. The fact that we are providing services to victims and survivors of Asian and Pacific Islander women living in Iowa, rural Iowa, I think that is important, because they are the ones that are usually in need more of services, right? So for me, I think the work that we had been doing had also then had led to other communities of color to start their own. So when we started Monsoon, it also then we have pulled other, immigrant and refugee community to do the same. So we have also assisted the African immigrant and refugee community to create their own organization to serve the community, to serve victims and survivors. So NISA African Family Services was then a program under Monsoon, and then a few years later, 1 year or 2 years later, then they were on their own. So for me, I think having someone who looks like you, especially here in Iowa, and then we have young people who are not seeing nonprofit work as something that they can do, I think that says a lot. So for me, I think it is important just to have that representation, and then also our focus, right? So when we're saying like, okay, let's work with the Asian or Asian Pacific Islander communities, what I'm more a cultural insider. So therefore, I know the community. There is no need for victims and survivors to explain, but instead we already know, right? So all of our staff at Monsoon and even at Napiseb are from our communities. So I think that is also, also important of just being the representation.
We know that the rate of sexual violence incident in API communities are like very high, and yet we don't talk about it like until like today. So just example, when I first met Cynthia, I think it's 2014, I believe, not long after we co-founded Napisef, and I was started talking about sexual violence in Guam. I think probably 2016, and at that time the issue of sexual violence in Guam was not like, you know, not like this year or last year about the clergy sexual violence. That was not even openly talked, you know, discussed. So we both know that it's for Guam in that small island, the rate of sexual violence is very high, and then also child sexual abuse. So, but then people not really talking about it. Then like, okay, let's do something. So that's how the work with Guam Coalition, it started in, I think, 2014, I believe.
From a broader standpoint, why do you think that people should be concerned about topics like this?
Well, I think because it affects everyone and it affects everything, right? So if we look at, for instance, if we look at mental health and chemical dependency, and oftentimes people who are have mental health issues or maybe depression or anxiety, it's often brought on by trauma or a traumatic experience in their life. And so I think it's important for everyone to be looking at addressing or trying to end gender-based violence. And, a lot of people, I think, don't realize it, but most everyone knows someone who's been affected by domestic violence or sexual assault. And, certainly not everyone goes around telling everyone, hey, I'm a victim. Some people certainly do, but I think it really affects all of us. It affects our relationships with each other. It affects our workplaces. It affects our health and well-being. It affects how we show up in the world. It affects so many things. So when we look at, just the mind, body, spirit, like, all parts of us, affects everything. And that impacts everyone else around us as well.
People should care about this sort of work, because it can be beneficial for their community, their health, their well-being. We all need a lot of healing, and we all need wellness in our lives and in our community. So I think that this sort of work can definitely help provide that.
I think from a wider standpoint that more people should be concerned about issues like this.
I think the issue of gender-based violence, the issue of domestic violence, the issue of sexual violence affect everyone, not just certain communities. What is different is like the manifestation of it and also the strategies of like how you will do the work, how you will like have you know, like culturally relevant strategies and ways in providing those services. I think that is what's different. But gender-based violence is a problem for everyone, but it's just how we will provide those services. It is also, for me, it is important that we have to look at how certain communities are doing the work. The ones that usually are in the margin are the ones who are doing great work because they are looking at the ones that are usually are forgotten, right?
Mhm.
So then for me, it is crucial then that we have to look at, let's say, when you say minority communities or underserved communities, sometimes they have better strategies because they understand that they are usually forgotten, right? So that is so for me, like specifically the ones who are doing the work on the ground, that is what I am looking at. Don't look at it like the way that mainstream methods or strategies, but
Mhm.
look at the other, like the LGBT community, like what are the things that they're doing, that is like, let's say, like how then they provide services. I think looking at the ones that are at the edge, I think is the best way of doing this work. But then in general, I think folks who are family members or community members, they should be concerned about gender-based violence, right? They should be concerned about domestic violence because everyone is affected by it. So just because a victim is a part of a family, it's part of a community. So therefore, whatever happens to that individual, it is crucial that the family members or even the community members understand how to provide those support, how to provide those, even prevention work. How then do you prevent it in the future that it's not going to happen again? And it takes the community, it takes the family to do that. So it's not just the victimization, but we also need to focus on the family, the community. So for me, I think really thinking that this is not just because you don't see maybe a family member or a community member that's not disclosing doesn't mean it's not happening in the community. It just means that maybe it's not a safe space for disclosure. Maybe they don't feel comfortable. So for me, I think that's why it's important, our work, that I'm not sure if I'm.
So why do people should care about this? Right? I think people are not realizing what is the impact of sexual violence in someone's life. And every time I talk about it, I get like angry because people actually not realizing what is the lifelong impact of sexual violence. So it's different from the survivor's perspective and then the harm doer perspective. So usually the harm doer kind of like taking it lightly. Oh, it was just a touch. Oh, it was just a joke, you know. But like for the survivor, it doesn't feel that way. And then like the impact is like so deep. And then how to fix it, if it can be fixed, it takes a long time, you know. So, and I think in our culture, because we don't necessarily talk about sex or sexuality, and then let alone sexual violence, then if that happened, then we just didn't share, we don't talk about it, and we keep kind of like the trauma to ourselves. And then we have to ask, so what is the impact of that, you know, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, how does it impact how our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to others? What if, you know, like we become mothers, then what happened, you know, the relationship between us as mothers to our children, you know? So if we are sister, then what is like the impact of that to our siblings? And, you know, if we are an auntie, you know, so what does it mean, you know? So then if we don't unpack this experience, this traumatic experience, then we carry it with us, and the trauma is transferable. So I think that's what people don't realize, that trauma is transferable. Just example, I was talking to someone and she actually said, this is like what happened to me, but I don't think it's mine. That's what she said. So something happened to her, and she said it doesn't, I don't think it's mine, which is mind-boggling for her. So then I explained to her about historical trauma, historical trauma that passed through generation. And it's almost like a light bulb kind of switch on. It's like, oh, now that makes sense. So I think once people understand like why it happened and how to work on the trauma, I think, how do I want to say it? I don't know. I don't think it's recovered. Your life is not going to go back like how it was before the violence. It would be different, but you can actually lead a balanced life. I think that's like one word, how I can explain it. So
Great answer. And as far as what more people can do, I'm sure you express that your frustrations and some of the challenges, but what more can the community do to support your work?
just with Guam Coalition, since what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think we start talking about community as a safe space. So when we use the mainstream approach, in shelter, the survivor usually say, why do we have to stay in the shelter? Why we have a curfew? Why we cannot go out? It's not fair because it's not our fault. So while the harm doer, like, they're free doing whatever their life. So then the idea is the community should be the safe space. So survivor, woman, man, trans, whoever the survivor, can stay in the community while the community can hold harm doers accountable. So, and it's not easy because it's the system, right? The system, how it works, whether it's criminal justice system or the cultural system itself, which is usually patriarchy. So we start unpacking that for many years now, understanding that sexual violence happen in many spaces. Actually, is across, like where our surrounding in our community, and also sexual violence happen in across lifespan. So it's not just like starting from zero to like elder, but also then happen all over the place. So that's why if we look at it, the rate is very high, right? It makes sense. So if your question is, so what can people do about this? With sexual violence, the focus is on healing or wellness. Right? That's the only thing. So with sexual violence across lifespan and happen in many spaces in the community, then we have to look at the healing has to be accessible across the age and anytime. So then the community can be a safe space. So then when we talk about following the mainstream. So say it like talk therapy. I'm not saying that talk therapy is wrong, but it's not accessible. So just look at like what happened with the Healing Heart in Guam. I think there is a waiting list, right? So then what do we do? So then we can make it accessible for whether it's children, So then it's actually balancing your wellness is not, it doesn't have to be complicated, I think, and Guam has natural environment. That's like water that is very cleansing, the food that is still, healthy, a lot of stuff. Then, like the dance, the cooking, the barbecue on the beach, there's things that can like make our body not in fight and flight mode. So I think that's what important is to recognize how our body can like move, and then finding how to kind of like balance it. And it's not a statics, so it's always an act of balancing. So I think that's if people can start paying attention to, it's like, okay, I feel like I'm not balanced. What do I do? NAPISEF just share we put together a wellness guide, and one of the consultant practitioner is Trisha Lisama from Guam. So in that book, we also share recipe, like food. Food is very healing. So healing is not that complicated. So that's what we kind of like try to kind of like plant the seed. Hey, community should be the safe space.
And what more can people do to support your work and to support survivors?
So I think at the very least, people need to get educated so they know how to respond when someone does come to them. If someone trusts them enough to come to them, to know how to respond, and which is as simple as saying, "I believe you," right? And trying to be supportive of them. I think also there's ways of like raising awareness in your community, talking to others about it. And then I also think we have to look at our own actions, and we have to look at the culture that we live in that allows gender-based violence, sexual violence, domestic violence to continue to happen, and look at how can we address the societal and social norms that allow it to happen, and what can we do about it. And oftentimes that starts with having conversations with our peers, with our families about this issue, challenging when someone is making a sexist joke or a joke at the expense of someone else, or objectifying someone, speaking up and saying something, right? Like, how many times have we heard someone make a horrible joke and we're almost frozen because we don't know what to say? So finding the words to respond to that person, and maybe it's about educating them, or maybe it's just simply saying, I don't think that's funny. I don't think it's funny to make jokes at the expense of someone else or objectifying someone. And so I think there's a lot of small things we can do that can have a really big impact. And then I think also we have to look at how we're raising our sons and daughters and our children, and how we, challenge those norms that really hurt our families and our communities.
For people that are curious, is to do some research, I guess, and find organizations in the area. There's not that many, but especially specifically for SA and the API community, I feel like. So I guess do some research, reach out. NAPISEF is super open, so reaching out to NAPISEF would be a great avenue to go.
First of all, I think when I think the very first disclosure, when folks who are had been harmed, individuals who had been harmed, had sought or had disclosed to you, I think just believing them. And I think that is the first step, is really believing anyone who disclosed that they've been harmed, that something is going on with them, just believing them. I think that is crucial. I think that's the first thing that a community member can do, is just that believing. Because if they don't, that means that it's going to shut down any kind of future disclosure, even asking for help, right? That is for me, that is really just believing survivors. And also, it doesn't have to be sometimes I think, especially for domestic violence, I know for domestic violence survivors, like they need to like find housing. They have to find like maybe, especially if they're still living with someone who is harming them. I think just really letting them know that you are there for them, right? That they don't have to leave. I think there's this notion that for DV work, for domestic violence work, that they have to leave. No, I think survivors understand when it's ready that they need to leave that marriage or that relationship. That's up to them. But it's really letting them know, like, oh, I'm here if whenever you need help. So I think community members also need to know what are the resources in the community that I can let them know that they have. So also knowing who is there, but also being the listening. Like sometimes I think just being like having someone just listening to them, I think is just also you just need someone to talk to. But there's also something that I've been really thinking about, that I think this is more in the prevention way, where folks don't have to disclose what had happened to them. They don't have to share the whole trauma. It's just really, I think we can just assume that each one of us had been through something that was harmful, right? And then how then do we make sure that we are, so for me, when we think about trauma informed, is really thinking that assuming that everyone has had an experience that's traumatic, but it's traumatic that in a way that it's not just a physical harm, but it's also harm that is societal, right? It could be racism, it could be like patriarchy, the effects of patriarchy. So that's also as traumatic as the one that has been harmed physically or sexually. So I think having this space where we create a way, like for organizations or for communities, to create a way where it's being listened to, and having safe spaces for, especially for young people, for children, to have that safe space to talk to someone, to have that disclosure, and not being taken away from what they know. What I'm saying is, like, usually in the US specifically, when a child or a youth disclose, they are taken away from that family. And then that becomes more, than they become part of the system that can also be as abusive as the one that they've been taken away.
If your question is, so what can people do about this? With sexual violence, the focus is on healing or wellness. Right? That's the only thing. So with sexual violence across lifespan and happen in many spaces in the community, then we have to look at the healing has to be accessible across the age and anytime. So then the community can be a safe space. So then when we talk about, following the mainstream, so say it like talk therapy. I'm not saying that talk therapy is wrong, but it's not accessible. So just look at like what happened with the Healing Heart in Guam. I think there is a waiting list, right? So then what do we do? So then we can make it accessible for whether it's children, So then it's actually balancing your wellness is not, it doesn't have to be complicated, I think, and Guam has natural environment. That's like water that is very cleansing, the food that is still, healthy, a lot of stuff. Then, like the the dance, the cooking, the barbecue on the beach, you know, there's things that can like make our body not in fight and flight mode. So I think that's what important is to recognize how our body can like move, and then finding how to kind of like balance it. And it's not a static, you know, so it's always an act of balancing. So I think that's if people can start paying attention to, it's like, okay, I feel like I'm not balanced. What do I do? You know, Napisef just share we put together a wellness guide, and one of the consultant practitioner is Trisha Alisama from Guam. So in that book, we also share recipe, you know, like food is very healing. So healing is not that complicated. So that's what we kind of like try to kind of like plant the seed. Hey, you know, community should be the safe space.